151st edition of the Royce Boys podcast starts right now.
Carolina basketball family is the strongest there's ever been, there ever will be.
Nate Humphrey hands King Rice the ball. Pushes into Hubert Davis. 8 seconds. Davis trying to get free. Over to Fox. Fox, baseline. Up for the shot. Good. Off the glass. Oklahoma calls timeout. But the game is over. The game is over. Carolina has upset number 1 Oklahoma. Been ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered by Minnie.
With 20 seconds left to play, goes back to Michael Jordan. Jumper from out on the left. Good! 63, 62, 13, 12, 11. Georgetown with one timeout. Brent Brown looking. Throw away to Worthy. 35. The Tar Heels are going to win the national championship. Carolina was foul. He takes the timeout. Technical foul. Technical foul.
Brown gets it into Williams. Here comes Williams front court. Williams on the drive. Gets it back out the head. Long outside shot. Short rebound. It's over. And how about the Tar Heels? They are the national champions.
The Tar Heels are the national dadgum champions.
And that's what it takes when you big time games. You got to compete. You do it with your brain, and you got to do it with your heart too. And that's pretty doggone good.
From QCBroadcasting.com, this is the Royce Boys podcast with your host, Josh Marlowe. Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the Royce Boys podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Today, I'm joined by both my co-hosts Anthony Pagnana and Mark Krings, and we're going to fully break down the 2020 Camping World Maui Invitational, which is being held in Asheville, North Carolina due to COVID. The tournament got relocated from the island to the mountains of North Carolina. But before we break that down, I'm going to bring Mark in. And me and Anthony have already recapped the College of Charleston game on a separate podcast. But you, of course, wrote the preview and wrote the recap. I wanted to hear your thoughts on what you saw in the Tar Heels season opening win against the Cougars on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was kind of what we expected. And, for those of you that did read the preview, I think a lot of it came true. Stretches of sloppy play. Carolina, fortunately, did start the game on a 16-2 run, but, most runs were knocking down outside shots, and it's, a lot of momentum, and it happens quickly. That was different for the run to start the game. So, certainly you want to go ahead, but definitely there was plays in there that were sloppy and kind of head-scratchers. And early in the second half, there's no doubt, especially when they came back and took that one-point lead, where I had flashbacks to last year of, shoot, is this, here we go again. It can't happen, especially it can't happen at home. And then I also had a flashback to last year when Caleb Love bit on the pump fake. I don't know if that was the first half or second half, but he came down kind of hard on the guard out there and left a little bit with an injury, but thankfully he came back. So, there were those stretches, but I think there are also a lot of positives to take away from it. One thing I really loved, the defensive effort from Caleb Love and RJ Davis. Those two, we heard a lot about their energy, how hard they play, how competitive they are, and hopefully that's just a small taste of what we can expect moving forward. Another thing that really stuck out for me was the overall balanced scoring. Before the game starts, if somebody tells me Garrison Brooks has, I believe it was either 6 or 8 points, I'm probably saying, we've probably struggled, probably not the best outing. What did it look like? It's kind of nice to have a team that is more balanced and we have more options that we can go to on a nightly basis. And then overall, I think all of the freshmen had a good showing. Caleb Love led us in scoring. Day'Ron Sharp, obviously, everything we had read and talked about him certainly came true there. And I think, his role is only going to continue to grow. Walker Kessler, for the limited numbers that he saw, I was really impressed with what he did, and I ended up reading later that it appears his minutes were a little bit limited because of something COVID related. Same with Pup Johnson.
Right.
So, they all came in, and I think they all gave flashes of what we can expect from them. And I think, you know, this is a young team, first game, so certainly you expect some of the sloppy play, but I think there's also a lot of positive takeaways.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you saw a lot of good stuff from your young guys, which I think, you know, Carolina needs that because I believe, and I may be wrong, I think this team is more gifted than they were a year ago, but they're also a lot more younger. So they're going to have the stretches where they go dumb, is the best way I know how to put it, where they forget to do the simple things, the little things, and they play bad. But they're still good enough to recover from that. I thought Caleb Love really – looked comfortable to be a freshman, first time playing for Carolina for Roy Williams in a game that matters. And then you talk about Daron Sharp, and if he plays like that, it's gonna be hard to keep that guy on the bench. Even though Armando Bacot gave you 12 and 8, so it's hard to complain with what Armando Bacot brought up or gave you. But I think me and Anthony talked about this ourselves, and you brought it up as well. Carolina's defensive pressure on the perimeter really stuck out to me. And that's something that, for me as a lifelong Carolina fan, Carolina's never been a really good defensive team. For people that grew up watching Dean Smith coach the program, they were really good defensively. That's not Roy Williams' MO. We want to play fast. We want to score the ball, get up and down the floor. And so I've always thought if Carolina can be average defensively, that's a game changer. And I think this team has the potential to be more than just above average because Caleb Love and R.J. Davis are they're very aggressive players naturally on the perimeter. And you add in the link that you've brought in with Puff Johnson whenever he gets out of COVID protocols and Walker Kessler. I think this team, if they want to be committed to playing defense at a high level, they can. And I think they're going to need that because something that I wrote about that I think, especially early on, they've got to find different ways to generate offense, and they did that in the game against Charleston where they were forcing turnovers and they were scoring on second chance points. So I think that's something that Carolina, while they're trying to get back to their roots of playing with two traditional bigs and they want to run, I still think they're going to have to find unique ways to score the basketball, and they did that in the season opening win against the College of Charleston. Is there anything else you want to add, Mark, from the win over the Cougars?
No, I mean, my whole overall approach for this season, especially how young we are at COVID, is just simply, hey, let's have good games where we build as a team, we come together, they learn the roles, and our end goal is obviously to be playing the best basketball we can be come March. And there's going to be rough stretches between now and then. But I think that first game was a nice building block and stepping stone to the team coming together.
Yeah, and I think that leads into a really good chance for Carolina to find out who they are. And they're going to – hopefully Maui gives them a chance to do that because normally, as I was mentioning before we got on here in our little pre-production meeting before we got on to record, normally when you get to Maui, you've had about 2 weeks of basketball to kind of, start feeling yourself out. Carolina doesn't have that. They've played one game. Some of these teams that are in the field have yet to play a game this season. But – you're still entering a tournament, Anthony, and I'll lead into you, where Carolina is going to be the presumptive favorite, although there's a lot of question marks around them. So as we get into Maui, what should we expect entering the tournament? Because when Carolina wins the Maui Invitational, they win the national championship under Roy Williams. That's a proven fact. They're 3 for 3. If Carolina wins this tournament, should we label them as a national contender after that 3 days in Nashville?
Ooh, it's a tough question because this year's Maui, not only is the fact that it's in Hawaii, or not in Hawaii, in Nashville instead, different, but the field's also a little bit different as well. This is not quite as powerful of a field as we've seen in the past. Honestly, if you look at it, I would say the next best team in this field is probably Indiana, I would guess. Just because we don't know a whole lot about Stanford. We saw Stanford last year. That was a team that, if the tournament had happened, probably makes the tournament. Now they're bringing in Zaire Williams, but we still don't really know a whole lot about them. Texas is a team that, again, there is so much hype around them year in and year out. They bring in Greg Brown, who we were talking about last night when we were talking about them just in general. But at the same time, you still just really don't. And from my perspective, I don't trust Shaka Smart. I think he is the most overrated coach in the country, one of the most overrated coaches in college basketball history in terms of how much hype he gets year in and year out, and is a 500 or slightly better than 500 coach at Texas. But still, that's the thing, is you don't know a whole lot about those. And then, you're talking about other teams like Providence who you could end up facing in the finals. You don't know about these teams because, again, now most of them will have played one game, but they're similar to you. You look at, Texas. They played University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. That's no one to write home about. Indiana played a soft opponent as well to start out of the game. Stanford gets a plus. So those are the types of teams that you're coming in against, where in the past, normally, even though it was, just a couple of games against lower tier opponents, you had a few games to sort of figure out, okay, who's where they need to be. Normally, you'd have probably a game against a power conference opponent or some of the other power conference teams. That's not going to happen this time. So there's a lot of mystery to this field. But for Carolina, that might end up being good because basically what you're telling your guys going in is, look, we don't know anything about these teams. There's no way to try to study up, learn about these teams, learn who's good, what they do good against some of these opponents. Nothing you can really do to prepare for them. You just have to come out and play your game. And I think that served this young basketball team well when they had to Asheville.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Indiana is probably also the next best team. Going into it, I think Carolina, Josh, as you mentioned, is clearly the favorite. We are the best team on paper, but a lot of times that doesn't always play out how it should. So, we're going to have to go there, play the way that we can, build on each game, play hard, and hopefully stack some wins. And here's an opportunity to do that. We talked a lot about that in the preseason preview is, it's important to win the games that you should. And when you look at this field, I think Carolina should win it and should stack up some of those. Texas and Stanford, those are two teams that traditionally play Carolina tough. And so, if we get to the finals, regardless of who we play, I think it's still going to be a tough opponent. Again, I think we got the talent edge. We have the edge talent-wise, but definitely, Texas, I'll never forget when they beat us down there in the Marcus Page, Bryce Johnson year, and there's that offensive rebound, and Page got thrown into the stands, and there was no call, but Texas always plays it tough.
Yeah, you mentioned games that Carolina should win, and they get that when they open it with UNLV. I guess UNLV is the Maui version of Chaminade. This team lost at home to Montana State to begin to begin their college basketball season. That's Carolina's first game in the tournament. That'll be Monday night at 7 o'clock on ESPN. Really, the matchup is really going to determine how this tournament or how the field goes for Carolina is that second matchup. And that's what I want to talk about the most because that's the one we know Carolina's going to play Stanford or Alabama. I think for ratings-wise, ESPN is pulling for a Carolina-Stanford matchup because you have the relationship of Roy Williams and Gerard Haas. They had Zaire Williams, who's a premier talent that chose Stanford over Carolina during his recruiting cycle. But Alabama's an interesting team. Carolina saw them last year in the Battle for Atlantis. They beat them rather handily in that tournament. Nate Oates has done a really good job in his year plus there on Tuscaloosa. He's upped the talent on that basketball program, up the energy around the fan base for a school that could really care less about basketball. And so I think for Carolina, in a year like this, they've got to control what they can control. And I'll get into what they've got to do to win 3 games in 3 days. I think they line up with really good depth, which you've got to have even though it's the early season. We've seen a lot of teams this week. They've played 3 games in 3 days or 3 games in 4 days. That can wear on you. But Carolina, I think we saw the other night, they've got as much depth as they've ever had under Roy Williams, and that's saying a lot because this team, when they're really, really good, they're really, really deep. So I think they have the depth to do that. But I think they're going to have to find different ways in this tournament to win. And I mentioned kind of leading on that College of Charleston post with you, Mark, that I think they've got to find different ways to score because, as you've mentioned, they're not going to just run up and down the court and score like they want to right now. That may happen in February and March, but in November, December, that's not happening. I think if they're good on the glass and they control the second chance opportunities, that's a good chance for this team to generate easy offense. But I think it really comes down to what do we read into this team defensively? They were really, really good against the College of Charleston, but that's a middle-of-the-road CAA team. You're now going up against, top-of-the-line, D1, Power 5 talent. how do our young guys hold up? But I still think Carolina's got the right recipe to go to Maui or go to Asheville and win 3 games in 3 days. What do you guys say?
Yeah, I think there's.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I think there's no doubt they can, and I will